Happy Sunday, everyone. This 12th day of February. I appreciate everyone coming out here to our Thomas Jefferson Club meeting. I'm Jeff McGeary, president of the club. We have another number of our other members here on the board. We have Steve Onfray, our treasurer, in the back. Thanks, Steve. Actually, Steve, to our point, the Temperance House is always gracious enough to have us here, but we've incurred some costs specific for this event. So if you're so inclined, it is Sunday, pass the bin around a little bit, and appreciate that. We have Brian Land, who's our Western Culture Committee Chairman, the topic of our discussion tonight. Here at the Thomas Jefferson Club, we discuss a variety of issues, whether it was the great health care debate, the immigration issue, the Constitution, Second Amendment rights, freedom, democracy, Western culture, our issue tonight. We try to rotate around to the various issues during our meetings to expose you to different ideas, to different thoughts, conservative viewpoint, of course, and that's the topic for our discussion tonight, is around Western civilization, Western culture. I'm going to deliver a few remarks briefly, and then I'm going to have Brian Land come up and discuss his perspective on this issue. And then Filip Dewinter. And Filip has visited us tonight from Brussels, Belgium. He is a senator in the nation of Belgium of the party of Vlaams Belang, which is Flemish Interest. And they, exactly? And they are the main opposition conservative party in Belgium. I've seen their facility over in Belgium. It's very impressive. They have a strong representation there, and they are very much on the front lines on this issue of defense of Western civilization, of Western values, and preserving not only Belgium, but the whole of Europe. And I wanted to bring Filip in here tonight to talk about this issue and the parallels to issues we're facing here in the United States on the immigration front, on the issue of multiculturalism, on the issue of national identity. And these issues are very important and need to be addressed, and that's one area where the Thomas Jefferson Club absolutely stands out. We talk about this issue. I think it's very important. We're having impact amongst local Tea Party groups, and even beyond that. We were down at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, this weekend in Washington, and talking about this issue and getting more organizations to discuss this and bring in speakers. So we believe it's very important. Just some ground rules. If folks could give their attention to the speaker, if we can minimize any photos or recordings. We have Dan McCabe from WKTP that'll be recording this live. It'll be available up on the internet. And if time permits, we'll have a Q&A at the end, and you can ask some questions to Mr. Dewinter, who is a senator in the Belgian parliament and also the leader of Vlaams Belang in Belgium. Before we begin, though, the official presentation, I just ask everyone to rise, and we'll recite our Pledge of Allegiance. Face any of the flags around the room. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Just a few brief remarks as I was putting this together. I know had a number of positive emails, and I often get the question, though, is why this topic? What do you mean exactly about Western civ, about Western culture? And just some ideas I put down here. I'll only take about an hour before we get started. No, about 10 minutes, because we're running a little behind, and just go over some points that I think are relevant and kind of setting the table for tonight's discussion. So in 1993, guys, nearly 20 years ago, then President Clinton delivered a commencement address at Portland State University, where he laid out his administration's vision for America. Clinton stated, "We want to become a multiracial, multi-ethnic society. This will arguably be the third great American revolution to prove that we can live without a dominant European culture." Around the same time, Jesse Jackson was leading students in California chanting, "Western culture has got to go." These were the early shots in the cultural war for the heart and soul of this country. And my question is when did Americans vote for a revolution to overturn our cultural core? When did we vote to overturn that European culture? And the answer is never. The American people were never consulted on this. Yet Mr. Clinton's cultural utopia is rapidly approaching. In that speech, Clinton then headed west and gleefully foretold California's situation with the European American population dropping below majority status. Half a century from now, he said, remember this was a 1993 prediction, there will be no majority race in California. Let's look at California today. In 1970, Americans of European descent were over 80% of the population in California. Fast forward to the 2008 census, less than 40. The population was literally cut in half. This was the state that gave us Ronald Reagan, governor, president. And also in California, if you look at the 2008 presidential election, 55 electoral college votes at stake in California. Now President Obama carried that state. John McCain only carried 36% of the vote. 55 electoral college votes going to the Democrats, going to Barack Obama, canceled out the GOP's vote total in the entire Midwestern section of the country. Truly, demographics are destiny, and it's going to present a real challenge for the Republican Party to continue to be competitive at a national level in these presidential races and even in some of the state races, particularly in California. We the people reads our Constitution, but if we are a we, what distinguishes us from others is the question. Are we a universal nation merely based upon values of all humanity? Are we a multicultural melting pot? Are we merely a landmass on the map? Or are we a Western nation with our own identity defined by our heritage and institutions, a civilization of our own? Whether we are discussing education or school prayer or immigration or liberty or sovereignty or the rule of law, underlying all of these issues is the question of national identity. Who are we? Identity encompasses many cultural, social, economic, territorial values, all of these. The American people who achieved independence in the late 18th and 19th century were few and homogeneous, overwhelmingly Anglo and Christian, broadly sharing a common culture, overwhelmingly committed to the principles prescribed by our founding documents. These principles and the founding settler people who wrote them carved out of a wilderness the greatest nation ever produced in the history of mankind, the United States of America. And for this, we will never apologize. The United States is an extension of Western civilization. Early Americans sought to strengthen our European ethnic core. They believed it to be vital to the unity and survival of the nation. Understand, please hear me clearly, that many people from many parts of the globe came to America and greatly contributed to that culture. But this is our core. Yet today, those who believe such truths are viciously attacked and singled out for insult and mockery. I've experienced some of this myself, and I know Mr. Dewinter has a great deal in his country. Charges of racism, fascism, and bigotry are hurled at any individual or organization that addresses this issue. But the true fascists are those who seek to dismantle our republic. The true intolerance comes from those who seek to stifle any debate and seek to impose their will upon us. I believe in their hearts many of these multiculturalists loathe the America that we will preserve in this country. What is so bad about Western civilization anyway? What is so horrible about the founding settler people to elicit such vile hatred and abuse from our adversaries? Let me be clear, we are not perfect. But what civilization other than the West has given more people access to a better life, to freedom, to free markets, to the rule of law, to individuality, to sovereignty, to religious freedom, to voting rights for women, freedom of speech, assembly, a free press? I could go on and on. No, we will not apologize. We will push forward, we will stand up, and we will stand true to our convictions. And we will defend our republic from those who seek to remake her into something that our founding fathers never intended. Americans of all races and ethnicities must reinvigorate and defend our core culture. This would mean a commitment to America as a religious and primarily Christian nation. Yes, respecting and encompassing various religious minorities, but adhering to Anglo values, speaking English, maintaining our Western cultural heritage core, and a commitment to the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'll just give you one final thought to ponder, and that was from the philosopher Rousseau. And he said, quote, "If Sparta and Rome perished, what state can hope to endure forever?" Even the most successful nations and cultures decay by ruthless assaults from those who hold only contempt and disdain for their host population. This issue is important. We're going to discuss it tonight. And with that, I'm very proud to bring up Brian Land, who will be followed by Mr. Filip Dewinter. So Brian, please come up and share your thoughts.
I'm going to ask everyone to bear with me tonight. I've got some notes up here, and I'm at that age where my eyes aren't what they used to be, so I'm going to have to hang in there. We're going to be talking about a little history tonight, and I know a lot of you are, all of a sudden when I bring up history, are going to say to yourselves, oh no, there's a danger, there's going to be a pop quiz later on. But no pop quiz. But we are going to be talking about history, and I want to start off with Rome. And how many people here, excuse me, have seen the movie Gladiator? You could raise a hand. It was a fun movie. It was a great movie. I enjoyed it. As a history major, I enjoyed watching the Roman troops. And this, if you have the movie Gladiator, this is a gladius. This is a reproduction. It's not meant to keep people away from the podium that don't like my speech. But it is the weapon of choice of the Roman legionary. You saw it in the movie Gladiator, very effectively used. And it helped forge the Roman Empire. But there was more to the Roman Empire than just the gladius. And if you look at the the strength of the Roman legions, the Roman legionaries stood about 5'6", 5'7", and they stood in disciplined ranks with this weapon, a short sword and a great square shield, and they faced off against barbarians that were 6'5", Jeff's height, they faced off against those fellows, and they did pretty well. I'm gonna switch at this point because I am struggling with my regular. Here we go, and actually this is what you mostly see in Hollywood, and it's what you picture. You picture the great Roman Empire, and barbarians are crashing against the gates of the empire, and the legionaries are standing there with that gladius, and they're in forts or wherever they are, and they're holding off the barbarian horde. As you heard the announcer in the movie say that this was the barbarian horde was out there against the Roman host. But actually, over the course of 300 years, the story is a little bit different. There were major battles. There were battles. There were times when, just like you saw in the movie Gladiator, those stout legionaries moved in manipular formation against those robust barbarian hordes and held them off or attacked them. But it's an exciting image. But the truth of the matter is that mostly there was a little more mundane story that went with the Roman Empire as it evolved, and you know, at first when confronted with those big barbarians, the Romans of course got a great idea, which is wouldn't be bad really to have, because we're all this height, to have some of these good-sized guys in our ranks. So they would look for somebody just like Jeff, 6'5", a mean face. 6'7". Okay. And if you look at the history of the empire, how many of you are familiar with what the Praetorian Guard was? Probably a few people are. They were actually the bodyguard of the Roman Emperor himself. And one of the first places we see those big, healthy barbarians is in the Praetorian Guard. And actually, the so-called barbarians, the Germans that were on the border of Rome, the border mostly being at one point the Rhine River and the Danube. They didn't come crashing across all the time. There were raids, there were some battles, but water, as we've studied human history, oceans and lakes and rivers, water really isn't a barrier with people. It actually helps facilitate human migration. And indeed, in the Roman Empire, there was a trickle of people that came across, and I say a trickle comparative to the population that existed in the empire at the time. And we see first the German influence in the army, but then we see people, the Alemanni and other people Burgundians that would slowly migrate into the empire. Slowly, there was a trickle of them, and they would become farmers. They would become tradesmen and craftsmen. They wanted to be in the empire. They wanted to learn the language. They wanted to learn to write Latin. They wanted to adopt Roman laws, customs, particularly their religion. They were the religion of my barbarian ancestors was more warlike. They wanted to settle down. They wanted to assimilate. And what's great about the history of most of the empire, the Roman Empire, is that assimilation took place successfully. Immigration took place successfully. There were groups that came over, but not in such numbers that it was overwhelming. Time went on. There were plagues. And we know more and more about these, not exactly from written history, but a study of graves and all sorts of things that archaeologists get into now. And what we see is there were periods of time where there were, well, we have a few guests coming in. We have a few, but there was a time where the plagues would hit population. There was depopulation, and more people would emigrate into the empire from the borders. And the trickle, if you will, became a flood. And whole tribes, the Franks, the Goths, moved into large geographic areas in the empire. I think about our guest tonight. He comes from Belgium, and the Franks moved into what it was Gaul and is now France and Belgium. And that was fine when they came in to just be a few farmers and to help man the ranks of the legion. But when they came in en masse, when the numbers were very large, the Franks quite naturally stopped seeing themselves as Romans. They saw themselves first as Franks, and maybe they were within the empire itself. But they saw themselves as Franks first. And the Goths saw themselves as Goths first and not Romans. The assimilation had stopped. And the Romans still had these. These had worked for 300 years, but the empire fell. They still had these. They were still a technological marvel. Great Roman steel. But it didn't help the Romans at all. The empire fell. The gladius didn't help them. I'm going to forge ahead in time and bear with me a little bit. How many of you here are familiar with a term by Jesus saying, turn the other cheek? We all know, turn the other cheek. Now, we're all sinners. We all don't do that all the time. Jesus was teaching us a spiritual concept in a corporeal world, and it was a great one. What's interesting about that is we are a Judaic Christian society. It's been inculcated into us. It's a core value. Jeff was talking about core values earlier. That's one of them. We have a religion in this country which teaches peace, turning the other cheek. Jesus is the founder of that benign philosophy, and his teachings have been strenuously preached into our culture, and it affects us individually, it affects us as a society. It helps make us what we are. Now, I have a few questions, and I said there wasn't going to be a pop quiz, but a few questions for you here, if anyone knows it. Does anyone here in this audience, and you would really impress me if you did know this, do you know who won the Battle of Yathrib? Anyone? Nah, that's a little tough. How about the Battle of Tabuk? Anyone? Tabuk. Not Tobruk, but Tabuk. I almost had a World War II guy out there. How about the Battle of Kiber, Uhud, Taif, Badr? Anyone know those battles? Now I'm going to give it away. Maybe. How many know who won the Battle of Mecca? Somebody out there does. You're cheating. Your teacher's pet, but that's okay. Who won the Battle of Mecca? Muhammad won the Battle of Tabeka. Muhammad won the Battle of Yathrib, Tabuk, Kabir, Uhud, Taif, Badr. Muhammad won those. In fact, Muhammad won 8 major battles. He led 18 raids, and he planned and won successfully, though he didn't personally lead them and slit the people's throats, 38 other battles. He planned them. He was a great general. He was a great warlord. He was successful. He was a warlord who later found God. I'd like to read an excerpt from a great military author, Richard Gabriel, who writes about Muhammad, the warlord. And I quote, "According to classical Sunni doctrine, jihad can refer generically to any worthy endeavor. But in Islamic law, it means primarily armed struggle for Islam against infidels and apostates. The central element of the doctrine of jihad is that the Islamic community, the community being the Ummah, as a whole, under the leadership of the Caliph, has the duty to expand Islamic rule until the whole world is governed by Islamic law. Expansionist jihad is thus a collective duty of all Muslims. Land occupied by Muslims is known as the Dar al-Islam, while all other territory is known as Dar al-Harb, the land of war. I ask you tonight to make your own comparison and analysis on the effect of Jesus' teaching and his life and how he lived it, by example, on the West, and the effect of Muhammad's life example on the Islamic world. How has Muhammad's life example affected Islamic populations? And do we want these populations migrating en masse across our borders? Think of the Romans. Think of the Romans. Thank you.
Right, we weren't supposed to bring weapons in tonight, but no, Brian, thanks for your remarks, and we're very happy to have Filip Dewinter again traveled here from Brussels, down visiting for CPAC, and visited some folks actually up on Capitol Hill talking about this issue we're going to talk about tonight. But his perspective on the front lines over in Europe, not only in Belgium, but the whole of Europe, some of the things they're seeing and some parallels that we can draw to what's happening in our country here in the United States. So, Filip, I'll turn the mic over to you. Thanks for coming.
Dear friends, first of all, I would like to thank Jeff, who I know already for some years now, for inviting me over. As Jeff already told, I was invited at CPAC conference, and I was the last 3-4 days in Washington to discuss this item and also to introduce the translation of a book I wrote, Inshallah, The Islamization of Europe. And that's what I'm going to talk about here tonight. Please apologize, I have to make my apologies because I'm not a native English speaker. My language is Dutch. We speak Dutch and French over in Belgium. But I will try to do my best in English. Well, first of all, I would like to start off with the words of the leader of Sharia for Belgium. Sharia for Belgium is an organization, a radical Islam organization in my country. That's the guy. He looks a little bit like Osama bin Laden, but I think he's even worse. And he said, we won't rest until Europe has become an Islamic state. And then we will march on towards the White House and the Vatican. We will carry out the promise of our dear Prophet in a peaceful way, but we will continue until Allah grants us victory. Dear friends, this guy, Abu Imran, is unfortunately not just an isolated nutcase. Western civilization faces extinction because of mass immigration, because of multiculturalism, because of Islamization. And already in 1974, Ouare Boumediene, who was the former president of Algeria, pronounced an address to the General Assembly of the United Nations, and he said, one day millions of men will leave the southern hemisphere to go to the northern hemisphere. And they will not go there as friends, because they will go there to conquer, and they will conquer it with their children. The wombs of our women will give us victory. And Boumediene's prediction is steadily becoming true in Europe. Since the first non-European immigrant workers entered Europe in the 1960s, the number of third world immigrants on Europe's soil has increased rapidly through, first of all, family reunification, secondly, marriage migration, or also asylum procedure. Each year, about 2 million non-European fortune seekers obtain a residence permit from the European Union. On top of legal immigration, there is also a massive problem with illegal immigration. As European Parliament report estimated that between 5 and 8 million illegal aliens reside in the European Union. Governments all over the West have lost their grip on immigration, and the political elite refuses to call a halt to immigration, to eliminate abuses of the system, and to take firm measures against illegal immigrants because of naivety, fear from being accused of racism, or a shared leftist ideological agenda. And there is no longer such a thing as controlled immigration. The immigration stream has become a sort of an immigration invasion, a mass phenomenon that is replacing the original population, all too often with cultural maladjusted immigrants. And if we do not tighten our immigration laws, the mass immigration of today will just be the tip of the iceberg. Right now, Europe is confronted by a wave of 2 million immigrants every year. And within a few decades, this could turn into an uncontrollable tsunami of tens of millions fortune seekers per year, who are willing to do whatever it takes to set foot in the European El Dorado. And I know also the United States faces similar immigration invasion, an immigration of millions of Mexican and Central American immigrants. While immigration and a very high birth rate cause the number of non-European immigrants in Europe to rapidly increase, white Europe is on the verge of extension. With the exception of Albania, which consists mainly Muslim population, not a single European country has a birth rate that is high enough to maintain the population. And the native Europeans threaten to halve within less than 50 years. And because of the continuously growing immigration streams towards Europe and the high birth rate amongst immigrants, the ethnic composition is dramatically changing in Europe. In Germany, 1 out of 7 of 82 million inhabitants is from foreign descent. 16% of France's population is from foreign descent. In the Netherlands, 1 out of 5 of the population is of foreign descent. In my own country, in Belgium, 1 out of 6, and in the UK, the United Kingdom, 1 out of 9. In Belgium, capital Brussels, the population consists for 70% of immigrants, a percentage that will rise to 85% in 2010. Every Western European country houses a great number of non-European immigrants, and it is estimated that about 5 million legal Turks, about 6 to 7 million when you count also the illegal Turks, live in Europe. They mainly live in Germany, France, the Netherlands, Austria. A total of 5 million North Africans reside in Europe, and about 5 million Africans also reside in Europe. Number of Asians in Europe runs up to about 4 to 5 million. And, well, the mass immigration negatively affects European societies. You have rising crime, you have the problems of unemployment, you have riots, riots in European cities. You have the major white urban exodus out of neighborhoods that are dominated by immigrants, the import of barbarian practices like forced marriages, honor killings, the ritual slaughter of animals, female circumcision, a decrease of the level of education, a growing number of unemployed immigrants in our cities, and increasing government expenses. And all of this is not really surprising. You can't have a first world country with a third world people. And the Western world is being invaded, not by an armed militia, but by millions of pauperized immigrants. And the growth through immigration is 3 times higher for the time being than the natural growth. And while the European native population shrinks, there is still an enormous population growth in third world countries. While 60 years ago there were 3 times as many Europeans as there were Africans, there are now already more Africans than Europeans. And according to predictions, by 2030, for every European, there will be at least 2 Africans. At the current pace, the population of Africa will amount to 1 billion by 2017 and to 1.3 billion by 2030. And if Europe does not stand up to the immigration invasion and install a strict immigration policy, the European population threatens to be overrun by a tsunami of pauperized third world immigrants. Dear friends, another threat Europe faces is the possible Turkish accession to the European Union. In 1987, Turkey applied for EU membership. At first, Greece pronounced its veto, but stopped its resistance in 1999. And ever since, Turkey has been an official candidate member state of the EU. And since 2005, the EU has been negotiating with Turkey on a possible accession. And granting Turkey the EU membership would be a fatal mistake. On January 1st of 2010, 27 member states of the EU counted a total of 500 million inhabitants. If a country like Turkey, who is a Muslim country, who is an Islamic state, becomes a member of the European Union, while 80 million Muslims will be also citizen of Europe. That means that we already have 20 million Muslims in the EU. When Turkey becomes a member state, we will have 100 Muslims in the EU, what means that 1 out of 6 of the inhabitants of Europe will be Muslim. Turkey's Prime Minister, Tayyip Erdogan, showed his true face and the true face of Turkey when he said in 1997, mosques are our barracks, domes are helmets, minarets are bayonets, believers are soldiers. And another quotation of the Turkish Prime Minister is, democracy is like a train. We shall get out when we arrive at the station we want. Well, I think it is unacceptable that the European elite decides on the accession of Turkey to the European Union without consulting the European people. And that's why these parties, European patriotic right-wing conservative parties, the Swedish Democrats in Sweden, the Danish People's Party in Denmark, who is in power, who is in government, the Freedom Party in Austria, who was in government and who will be in government after the next elections, and the Lega Nord of Umberto Bossi, who is a part of the Italian government, and of course my own party, Vlaams Belang, decided to organize a European referendum on the accession of Turkey to the EU. In the 80s and the 90s, we were pleased to witness the fall of communism in Europe. In Western Europe, however, communists have now turned into so-called anti-racist, into multiculturalists. And the anti-racist multicultural struggle has now replaced the communist class struggle. Immigrants and other so-called minority groups have replaced the working class proletariat. In recent years, the working class changed political sides. The left-wing parties, however, embraced the immigrant population, and eventually the objectives of communism and multiculturalism are in fact the same. Both strive for equality of cultures and people and want to create a new type of man that is no longer determined by its cultural environment but raised according to multicultural principles. And the anti-racist struggle has replaced the proletarian revolution, while discrimination has become the surrogate for the repression of the working class. These discriminated minorities, of course, need to be emancipated, raised, and especially undergo a multicultural brainwashing. After the Soviet Union collapsed and the terrible crimes that took place during communist rule were revealed, this ideology lost its credibility. The new left made use of the immigration problems to dress communism up as something new. And in order to weaken Western European and Western civilization, several guilt complexes are being cultivated. Racism, violence, anti-Semitism, slavery, colonialism, and xenophobia are represented as the West's original sins. For this reason, the European people have lost their right to a proper identity, culture, and traditions. And the European nation states are harmful anachronisms and responsible for anything that goes wrong in this world. The multicultural ideology has become some sort of new religion with the equality of cultures as greatest dogma. And the cure for this European disease is obvious. Open the gates of Europe for the pauperized masses from third world countries. Mass immigration as a sort of Wiedergutmachung, as they say in German, for colonization. And our society needs to be reprogrammed according to multicultural prescriptions. Institutional racism needs to be tracked down and eliminated, and the entire population has to be re-educated to make them more politically correct. Meanwhile, multiculturalism and mass immigration have become the Trojan horse of Islamization. Millions of Muslims and their families came to live in Europe while multiculturalism encourages Islam and under the guise of freedom of religion put it on equal terms with European religion. Islam is taking over Europe. It is the fastest growing religion on the old continent. While Western Europe counted between 1 and 2 million Muslims in 1960s, this number has risen to more than 20 million today in Western Europe and more than 50 million in the whole of Europe. Mosques and Quran schools flood our cities. Islamic customs and symbols, from ritual slaughter over headscarves to Islamic holidays, are authorized, made official and treated equally as the traditions of our European civilization. More and more headscarves and jalabas pop up in the streets of every major European city. Neighborhoods and districts turn into Islamic ghettos where there is no sign of integration, let alone assimilation. And the Islamization is in fact a new sort of colonization that steadily changes Europe into Eurabia. Islam is Europe's hereditary enemy. Islam is a religion of conquest that tried 2 times to subjugate Europe. The first invasion took place in the 7th century. Spain, Portugal, and even the south of France were conquered by Islam. And it was until 732 that Charles Martel stopped the march of Islam in France, in Poitiers. And it would last another 800 years to drive away Islam from southern Europe. And the Crusades were actually defensive wars in order to prevent a new Islamic invasion. And the Reconquista came to an end in 1492 when the last Islamic troops fled from Granada towards the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. In the 15th century, when the Ottoman Turks attacked Europe from the east, our continent was besieged a second time. The second invasion was stopped at the gates of Vienna in 1683. Today, we in Europe, we Europeans, are under attack again. And the third Islamic invasion is taking place as we speak right now. And this third invasion isn't about real warfare. Of course, there is a terrorist threat over in Europe. We had attacks in London, Madrid, Paris. We had our own 9/11. But however, more disturbing is the ticking demographic time bomb. For more than 40 years, millions of Muslims are peacefully overrunning Europe. Through mass immigration, conversion, propaganda, and family reunification, Islam is marching on. Next year, the world Muslim population is expected to increase by 35% in the next 20 years, rising from 1.6 billion in 2010 to 2.2 billion by 2030. It is estimated that about 18 million Muslims live legally in Western Europe. When taking the number of illegal aliens into account, Western Europe counts more than 20 million Muslims. In Eastern Europe, a similar evolution is taking place in the whole of Europe, Russia included. There are officially more than 50 million Muslims. And projections show that the Muslim share of the European population is expected to grow by nearly 1/3 over the next 20 years, and from 50 million now to about 73, 75 million in 2030. And the situation is currently not yet as bad as in the United States, but as Patrick Buchanan warned in his book, The Death of the West, and I quote, "Where Europe is at today, America will almost surely arrive tomorrow," unquote. And dear friends, Islam is like a predator. It always attacks the weakest prey. And Europe is weak. Europe is on the verge of extinction, losing its identity and culture and becoming an economical giant on clay feet. Europe is not only committing demographic suicide, but is terrified to defend the norms and values of European civilization. Just like AIDS affects the physical resistance of human being, multiculturalism affects the identity and demographic resistance of a people and a civilization. And Islam takes advantage of our weakness and behaves like a cuckoo that lays its egg in the warm European nest. We Europeans are unsuspectingly hatching this cuckoo egg and will eventually be cast out of our own nest. And because of multiculturalism, Europe stays blind for the threatening danger of Muslim fundamentalism. Since the 80s, several extremist groups have infiltrated Europe. Governments and security agencies never interfered. This way, European nation allowed a fifth Islamic column to come into existence on European soil. And these extremist organizations not only plan terrorist attacks on European soil, but also spread fundamentalist ideas among the growing Muslim communities in Europe. And it's not surprising that the attacks in New York, Madrid, London, as well as many failed terrorist attacks, were the work of Muslims that lived in the Western world, who were raised and educated, who were born here in United States of America and in Europe. And most Muslim extremists, however, do not commit terrorist attacks, but conduct their jihad through conversions, through infiltration, through agitation, intimidation, and undermining our Western civilization. And rejecting terrorism isn't a question of principle in Islamic circles, but a question of tactics. Meanwhile, Muslim enclaves in European cities are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the authorities can't hardly maintain control over these areas. Fundamentalist Muslims use these Muslim ghettos as a beachhead for the conquest of the entire society. This ghetto strategy, as we call it in Europe, allows the fundamentalists to control the Muslim community and apply the Sharia, the Islamic law system. And the demographic rule of law is replaced by an Islamic rule based on the Sharia. In the suburbs of Paris, where riots often take place, there are more than 700, already 700 no-go areas, according to official instances. Zones where the French authorities, the French police, have almost completely lost control. The same is happening in London, in Berlin, in other European cities. These ghetto communities are breeding grounds for Muslim terrorists and beachheads of Islamic fundamentalism. Dear friends, the cowardly refusal of the elite, our political but also cultural elite, to defend our own culture and civilization or to propagate our identity has become the Achilles heel not only of Europe but indeed of the entire West. Let me give you some examples of the multicultural policy in different European countries. Affirmative action in education and in labor market is encouraged. Teaching package in schools are extended to lessons in minority religion, particularly Islam. The food habits of minority cultures and religions is accommodated in institutions such as the schools, hospitals, armed forces, and prisons. Absenteeism of minority pupils due to religious or other special days related to their ancestral culture or religion is tolerated. Minorities are helped to continue to use their own languages rather than them giving to adapt and learn the language of the host country. Christian and European symbols such as crosses, but also a simple Christmas tree or simple Christmas decorations are done away with in order not to offend certain minority, mostly Islamic groups.
That'll never happen here.
Yeah, the supporters of multiculturalism are in control also of the social debate. And this is not a surprise, they control the European politics and also the media. Dear friends, America's immigration problems pale, I think, in comparison with what confronts Europe. America's major ethnic minorities are not Muslims, but Christian, while the mainstream culture is also rooted in Christianity. But at the other hand, you are confronted with a too massive, often illegal Mexican and Latin American immigration, which may alter and even endanger your European Western roots. And in Europe, the secularized post-Christian culture is facing a fast-growing Muslim community. America, unlike secular Europe, has remained rooted to a larger extent in traditional Christian values. And I do not doubt that if these values continue to decline in the US, America risks to, within some decades, in the same situation as Europe is now. However, America can learn from the impending European catastrophe and avoid a similar fate. Let this be a call to every American to protect and preserve your European and Western values, and to control your borders. Europe and the United States of America have to make a choice. Keep on undergoing the immigration invasion and Islamization, or resist. Protecting our national identity and cultural singularity does not imply that we must seclude ourselves from all other cultures and external influences. Gradual and controlled interaction is the way ahead, and accordingly the admission of a limited number of immigrants may be beneficial. But so too, for any realistic person, is the present disastrous shambles in which genuine cultures interaction is being replaced by a third world invasion and even Islamic expansionism. The motto of today's Western rulers may be diversity, but in practice, many different and often clashing cultures are forced into coexistence on the same territory. The consequence is that in almost all of the major European cities, entire boroughs have been transformed into third world or Islamic enclaves. And the original citizens are bullied out of their neighborhoods or forced to remain low-key, invisible and irrelevant until they die foreign outcasts in their own country. The West, I think, needs to regain his fighting spirit. A Western Renaissance is only realistic if we get out of the multicultural straitjacket, renounce cultural nihilism, get back our identity and cultural uniqueness, and dare to decimate the superiority of our Western civilization. And in this context, it is regrettable that countries that are part of our Western or European civilization often seek to damage or even destabilize our countries of this community for the sake of their own short-term, often economic interests. The people belonging to our European civilization, Europe, United States of America, Canada, and Russia, must work together in order to defend and secure our common identity and our common European Western heritage. The United States has to put an end on its efforts to bring Turkey into the European Union. The EU membership of Turkey is not only disastrous for Europe, for us Europeans, but in longer terms also for the United States. And dear friends, the problems of Europe are also the problems of the United States and even the problems of Russia. In order to save our Western and European civilization, European countries and the United States first need to regain control over their borders and stop the immigration invasion. And the immigration policy needs to be based on the social and cultural safety of our Western civilization. It is time to stop the unification of our own identity. How can we expect immigrants to adjust to a society that we disrespect ourselves? How can we expect immigrants to try to fit into a society that is, according to multiculturalists, racist? How can we expect immigrants and Muslims to assimilate to a culture, or either to integrate to a culture that does not believe in and stands up for its own values? And I would like to conclude with a quote of an American president, 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, who wrote in 1919, some days before he died, on the subject of immigration. Any man who says he is an American, but something else also, isn't an American at all. We have room for but one flag, the American flag. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. And we have room for but one sole loyalty, and that is loyalty to the American people. And I think that your president, President Roosevelt, was right. What we first need is a strict immigration policy. People who want to start new lives in our countries must first show that they bring skills and attitudes that will make a positive contribution and add value to our society. And secondly, the West must start a civilizational moral offensive based on the foundation of our greatness: Rome, Greece, Christianity, and humanism, real humanism. There are the common European values that need to be promoted, and foreigners wanting to settle here must show loyalty to their host society and the principles of our civilization. And they must know that they have to adjust to our way of life and not the other way around. And if the immigrant does want to be loyal, if he doesn't want to adjust, then he has no place, I think, in the United States of America, in Europe, or in our Western countries. Let me conclude with the words of the leader of the Western Coalition, who says to his troops when they're going to attack the evil forces of darkness in the film The Lord of the Rings: "Men of the West, stand up and fight." I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Philip. So a question for the audience tonight is, are we going to sit or are we going to fight? What is it going to be?
Well, we're going to fight. That's a fact. We're going to fight.
So guys, it's a hugely important issue. For Brian's remarks and for Philip's, I think a great insight and very eye-opening lecture on this topic and how it parallels also to what we face here in America. Western civilization, the United States to be an extension of it, Canada, as far east as Russia, that we have a common fight for our identity in our corner of the globe. So guys, I'll open it up, friends, to any questions you might have for Mr. Dewinter. I'd ask if you could state your name, where you're from, and then quickly arrive at your question.
My name is Ken Sell from Furlong. I'm really anxious to know how your presentation was received at CPAC. Don't tell me you weren't received well.
Well, I know CPAC is a conservative political action conference, but I was a little bit deceived because only one conference took place about this issue. A small conference organized by Youth for Western Civilization with Peter Brimlow, with Pamela Gaylor, with Robert Spencer also. And I had the impression that it was not really a main issue for American conservatives for CPAC. And I think it should be a main issue because this is what it's all about. It's about our identity, about our cultural values, about who we are and what we are. And if you don't speak up about this item, I think, well, you don't have to speak about other items neither. It's all about economics. It's all about the free market and how the free market will save our society. No, our society will be saved by the fact that we are able to believe in ourselves, in our cultural identity, and our norms and values, our Western and European norms and values. And I also attended to the speech, the conference of Sarah Palin. I heard a lot of one-liners, too much one-liners. In fact, I heard only one-liners. And it was all about economics and how great the American nation was, and we are all one under God and the American flag and that sort of things. No problem for me. It's also my belief. But she never speaks up. They never speak up about what's really counting, and that's identity. That's the defense of our way of life, our values, and I'm afraid that they are, well, they don't dare to talk about it because they are afraid of being accused of racism, being accused of colonialism, being accused of xenophobia, and so on and so on. And when they are afraid to speak up about these issues, the left has already won. Because they're always doing the same. And it's happening in Europe almost every day. We are threatened as racists, xenophobes, anti-Semitics, and so on and so on. And when you accuse somebody of being a racist, you don't have to debate anymore. It's no longer necessary to organize a discussion. If you say to somebody, you are a fascist because you are a racist, and so on and so on. End of discussion. We don't talk anymore. And that is what's happening now, and they shouldn't be afraid to talk about these items, but they are.
Well, can you speak freely in Belgium?
Well, no, not really. There is free speech, but you can't speak freely. And there are, we had a lot of lawsuits against our party. We were condemned, and we had to start up with a new party. And we were more successful than ever. We had about 25% when we started the new party, because the people know that we are talking about those items the other parties are not willing to speak about. And okay, the system tries to weaken you, tries to kill you, but everything that does not kill you makes you stronger. And therefore, I'm not afraid of the so-called anti-racist, political correct elite who is very left-wing and who is trying to kill us. We have the support of the people, and that's the only thing that counts in a democracy, I think. Yes.
A bill called Washington Crossing. Can you give us some insight on what happens to the Muslims when they come into European countries, how they gain citizenship, and how are they creating voting blocks in Belgium, France,
Yes,
and the rest of these countries?
Well, you have to know in my country, for example, 7 years ago, they voted a law who granted the right to vote to non-European citizens. So a non-European immigrant, an alien from, let's say, Congo, now can vote in my country without being a citizen, without having the citizenship. The left-wing parties wanted this because when you have, for example, in the city where I live, we have about 20% of Muslims. Antwerp, second biggest harbor city of Europe, we have about 20% of Muslims. Without the support of the Muslim population, and about about 50% of them have Belgian citizenship, the other 50% doesn't have citizenship. Without the support of the Muslim population, we wouldn't have a socialist mayor. We would have a right-wing mayor. I would be the mayor of Antwerp because my party, but my party is the biggest party of Antwerp. We represent 34.5% of the votes, and the Socialist Party only represents about 28% of the votes. But together with other, the Green Party and the Liberal Party and so on and so on, and with the support of the Muslims, they are in charge, and we are not. So, in fact, it's an ethnical vote. It's even more than that, it's an ideological vote. And the Muslim vote Muslim. For example, we are the only party in my country who does not have Muslims on our lists, who have no Muslim candidates. Can you imagine we have a Christian Democrat Party? In the past, it was the largest party of my country. In the city council of my hometown in Antwerp, you have 5 elected Christian Democrats. 3 of them are Muslim. 3 of the 5 elected members of the Christian Democrat Party are Muslims. What are they doing in a Christian Democrat Party? They are no Christians, they are Muslim. Well, it's crazy, but that's what's happening now. And Muslims, they vote Muslim, or they infiltrate into other parties, and then they vote for their Muslim candidates.
The decline of Christianity in Europe, that's had a big effect on the politics there, I guess, with Muslims coming in. Right?
Yes.
The same thing is happening here in this country. They constantly attack religion here now, the liberal side, and as the religious belief declines, people don't have anything else to fight with, you know. Is that
It's exactly the same situation. Exactly the same situation. Exactly the same. Yes, and that's what I told you also. Well, you have large immigration coming from South America and from Mexico, but all those immigrants, at least they are Christians. They share the same values, the same, well, more or less way of life. We are confronted with Islamic immigration. They don't share our way of life. They hate our way of life. They hate Europe. They hate our Western civilization. And, well, in fact, they are sort of, the mass immigration has become a sort of Trojan horse of Islam into Europe. And we are not able to stop it for the time being, because the birth rate of the Muslim population is very high. The Muslim population in Europe has a birth rate of, well, between 4.5 and 5–6%. The white Christian population of Europe has a birth rate of 1.4. So it's a dying population, and we are replaced by young Muslims. When I walk in the streets of my hometown, I see elder people, Antwerp, Flemish, European people, who come to me and say, "Keep up the good work. We support you. We vote for you." And then I see a young Muslim woman wearing the headscarf with 2 or 3 or 4 kids and a baby, and so on and so on. So that's the future. And it's not a pleasant idea. No.
Hallie Sharia.
Ladies first.
Oh, I was going to say, even if they were to stop immigration with the rapid birth rate, other than starting a fundraising campaign for, you know, just to have more babies, how do you even see the problem rectifying itself, even if you just stop immigration right now?
Well, you should not only stop immigration. Of course, we have to close our borders for non-European immigrants who don't add any value to our society. But you also have to encourage, well, the family policy. That's what we need. Stable families, if possible, a man and a woman with kids. That's what we should do. But also in Europe, as you already said, you have the decline of Christianity. So having a family for a lifetime with 3 or 4 kids, that's almost not tolerated anymore. You should have at least a new relationship every 4 years, no kids, double income, no kids, that's about it. That's the ideal. Also in Europe, and that's one of the main problems we are confronted with. Yes.
Do you think that the leaders of opposition parties in Europe are they putting their heads in the sand? Do they realize what's happening and it's for political expediency that they want these people to?
Of course they understand what happened. They are not completely stupid. Although sometimes I think they are, but nevertheless. But they understand. They know all those facts and figures. They know everything. But they are not really interested, because for them they have the power now. They want to stay in power, and that's about it. And après nous le déluge, they say in France. They don't care about the future. And for them, all those immigrants, they vote for them. Certainly the left-wing parties. Left-wing parties are in power in many European countries. Socialist parties are in power. The old communists have become socialists, social democrats, and they are in power in a lot of European countries. And with the patriotic right-wing conservative movement in Europe is going strong now. We are taking over in some countries. We do it in Italy, we do it in Switzerland, we do it in Holland, in Denmark. It will happen also in Austria and also in France. You have presidential elections in a few months. Marine Le Pen with the Front National is doing very well, will be maybe in the second tour. And okay, the people know that they have to stand up and to resist. And I think the only hope for Europe is that the patriotic right-wing conservative parties become even stronger than they are today. But it's up to the people to decide and to vote. Yes?
Nora Berlinger, Fort Washington. I have understood that the Islamic culture, mainly Saudi Arabia and the places with lots of oil money, has been infiltrating into our society here in the United States, not necessarily by moving here, but by giving millions of dollars to the big Harvards, Princetons, all of those places to have an Islamic center built at every college so they can infiltrate our own citizens into that way of thinking. Is that happening in Europe too?
Oh yes, with the petrol dollars they are paying their way in the European Union. They not only are paying for the mosques and the madrasas and the cultural Islamic centers and so on and so on. It even goes much further than that. For example, a woman who wants, they are paying Muslims, they're paying Islamic women to wear the veil. They get about, I think, for the time being, about $150 a month if you wear the veil. Saudi Arabia does it, so it's a big cultural foundation of Saudi Arabia who is doing this. And also, of course, they have a lot of money. All the petrol dollars they can buy themselves in, not only in Manchester United or even in the most famous football team in Europe, Barcelona, is playing now with Emirates. But they are also bribing politicians to vote laws in favor of Sharia law to be implicated into our civil laws and that sort of things. They have a lot of money to do that sort of thing. So it's also happening in Europe, yes, certainly.
Maybe Tom Gerard. Tom Gerard from Holland. How is Sharia law handled in Belgium?
Well, Sharia law is already implicated in a lot of European cities. We have Sharia-controlled zones, it's called. You have the posters with Sharia-controlled zone, where you have no alcohol, no gambling, no music, no concerts, no smoking, no nude, and so on and so on. Islamic rules enforced. And when you enter a Sharia-controlled zone, for example in London, then you find this sort of signs, and then you know that in this zone you can only eat halal food, no pork. There will be no alcohol in the shops. There will be no alcohol in the pubs. Women have to wear the veil, otherwise you don't enter the zone, and so on and so on. You have only in London, I think, about 30 Sharia courts who are working every day. And Sharia law is, in fact, replacing our civil laws in those neighborhoods where Muslims are already representing a majority of the population. Yes. But don't forget, Sharia is a part of Islam. Islam is the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sharia. Those three things are essential for Islam. You always,
The no-go zones you were telling us about? Is that the no-go zones you were talking about?
these are mostly also the no-go zones. The Sharia enforced zones are the
Well,
no-go.
how about the regular police who were supposed to be in the front? Did they tell you you
Well,
can't go there?
regular police, you have to understand, for example, in UK, in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain, the police integrated Muslims into the police force. So you have now Muslim women wearing the headscarf who are a part of the police force. So it's when that sort of thing happens, it's over and out. They are not going to resist against the Sharia-controlled zones. They support it. Yes.
Are the Eastern countries in any better shape, like Poland is?
Yeah, much better.
Comes to the Muslim?
That's the only good thing that came out of communism. They didn't have mass immigration. They had this iron curtain around let's say, the communist countries of Eastern Europe, and so they didn't have the problem of mass immigration. Now mass immigration starts, and a lot of Muslims are coming in from the Caucasian republics, Chechnya, and so on and so on and so on. But that's not yet massively. They can still cope, yeah. They are better off than we are in Western Europe. Much better.
Hi, I'm Deborah Piskey-Wilmster. I wanted to say something about CPAC because I was there also. And it was great. It was my first time there. It was such a wonderful experience being surrounded by conservatives for 3 days. This subject, Islam Sharia law, concerns me greatly for the past 10 years. I'm deep into this. We do have a big problem here. We don't have the numbers that you have, but it's a very big problem here now. Don't be fooled. And CPAC, I'm sorry to say, has been compromised. There was a second panel earlier before Robert Spencer's panel, and I stumbled upon it almost, and I was shocked at the things that I heard. The guy that was moderating it was a guy, Suhail Khan, K-A-H-N. And when I saw him, he looked familiar, and I recognized him, but I wasn't sure who he was. And there were two speakers. You know, one was a Jewish professor, and one was a Christian evangelical. Well, the Jewish professor handed out a piece of paper beforehand, and the title of the paper was "Why Jews Cannot Criticize Sharia Law." Mm-hmm. And I was shocked. And I began reading it while I was trying to listen, and this man who teaches at Catholic University, of all places, was in the end basically defending Sharia law. So that just, you know, I couldn't really believe it. So at the end, when it was time for the questions and answers, I stood up, and I didn't even know where to begin, but I knew that Gaffney was going to be up there, Pamela Geller, Robert Spencer. I said, all you need to go to the presentation at 3 o'clock to hear the truth about Sharia law, because there's no truth here. Well, this Suhail Khan got upset with me, and, well, they're not endorsed by the ACU, the American Conservative Union, and we had a bit of a back and forth, and I left. Well, after I left the room, I Googled Suhail Khan. You Google Suhail Khan. He's associated with, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood. So you have the Muslim Brotherhood infiltrated into the American Conservative Union, who I was hoping would save us from this, would be on the forefront. On top of it, I went to the Reagan banquet that night. Who said the Pledge of Allegiance at the Reagan banquet? Suhail Khan. And Grover Norquist, I'm sure you're all familiar with that name. His wife is a Muslim.
Yes.
And she does not wear hijab and such, but don't think that he's been compromised and fooled by Islam. His defenses are down. So these two people, Grover Norquist and Suhail Khan, are inside CPAC. And they're trying to push out people like Frank Gaffney, who's on the forefront, Pamela Geller, and Robert Spencer. That's just shocking to me.
About Jennifer Stefano, did they run into her?
Well, Jennifer spoke, but not about Islam.
No, I know.
But anyway, I just got back last night. Tomorrow morning, one of the first things I'm going to do is to call the ACU and to write to everybody there. This has to be unturned, because if we can't save by the, you know, by this group, if this group will not give voice to this problem, and they gave them a very small room, a room that's a third of this size. This needs to be in the main ballroom. This needs to be on the main screen. Everyone needs to hear about this problem. So it was interesting that there was a second panel, but it was saying the exact opposite.
I know it was a very small panel. I know Governor Norquist. I was invited by him.
Just a quick comment. Bernadette's point is excellent. I saw that down at CPAC as well, and I think this gets to the bottom of the issue. As conservatives, what is it at CPAC, the Republican Party, what is it are we trying to conserve? We call ourselves conservatives. It's not necessarily, it is an issue, but free markets or the economy or lower taxes. We have to look at the underpinning, the fabric of our society, of our civilization, which is Western, not apologize for this. This has given us the rights that we have, even the ability to have this meeting tonight. And I'll tell you, there was organizations that called this restaurant. There were organizations that emailed me that tried to shut down this meeting because of our speaker and because of some topics we discussed a year ago here with some other speakers, and this meeting was attempted to be shut down. So you need to stay active. What can you do currently? Although we are a two-party system in this country, talk to your representatives, talk to your committee people. What is your position on national identity? They'll look at you and say, what are you talking about? Explain the issue. Educate. That was the reason initially we developed the Thomas Jefferson Club, was to educate folks on these issues and then get active on an idea or a cause that's important to you. So I just wanted to mention that, and with that, we'll take one other question. Let's take Carlo, go ahead, you can close it out. Well, let's have it be a question, though.
Statement is fine. Statement is fine.
Okay, my name is Carlo Granetto from Doylestown. And what I wanted to say is basically this. So let's make sure that we elect officials, legislators that are going to be sensitive to this. So now let me make my little small spiel. I'm working for Sam Rohr. I'm a volunteer for Sam Rohr. And one of the issues that came up is when I went to the meeting for Act for America, and John Ryan asked me exactly what does Sam Rohr think about Sharia law, and what's his position on it. So I asked him this at a public meeting, and it was brought out at the debate in Phoenixville, and here's his opinion on it. Firstly, he says Sharia law is incompatible and is a violation of the U.S. Constitution. He went further. What he said is that if you're a strict fundamentalist Muslim, you are essentially, and believe in this, you're essentially violating your allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. And so basically, you can make a decision who you want to vote for, but I'm saying to consider Sam Rohr, and if you want to look what the other candidates talk about this, but he's made this public statement about what he feels about it. And we've got to get the right legislators. And of course, Sam Rohr is running for the U.S. Senate, and if you're a registered Republican, I urge you to vote for him.
Thanks for your comment, Carlo. If you're interested further in this topic, John Ryan, you want to raise, okay, in the back with Act for America, organization that's very active on this issue. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming, being part of this discussion tonight. Please go out, educate, talk about this issue, remain involved. Come back here next time for the next meeting, and with that, men and women of the West, stand and fight. Fight with us. Thank you.
Come back below. Come back